Hi everyone, number one Marmaduke fan here, and I'm looking at a stack of volumes for World War Blue from the local library. Uh, World War Blue is one of the stupidest manga I've ever read. It is so stupid, I hate so much of it, yet I absolutely love it. And I think the only way I could possibly love it more is if it was just a little bit more stupid than it already is. So the Japanese name for this is Aoi Sekai no Chisunde Kanzenban, and World War Blue is kind of an English translation of that. I think this is called a gaijinka. A gaijinka, you've seen maybe like Pokemon gaijinka, where artists will draw Pokemon as human beings. So a gaijinka manga takes something abstract and attaches a human personality or a human face to it. Like the planet Earth will be drawn as a cute girl, or internet web browsers will be drawn as cute girls. Hetalia is probably like the most popular anime or manga I've seen from this genre. I never enjoyed the really kind of erratic sense of humor of Hetalia, but I always kind of admired just what a great concept that was. The concept is that the nations of the world were people, and they would react with each other and have romances and have rivalries that were supposed to, I guess, match up with real world planet Earth politics. Like World War II, Italy is sort of a dopey character. Germany's sort of a strict character, that kind of thing. So World War Blue is supposed to be about the console wars of the 1990s, meaning that most of the characters in this book are supposed to be some representation of a video game, either like a single video game or a video game franchise. And they sometimes are a little bit uneven about these things. Okay, so like this is supposed to be Kirby. Her name is Carvide. You see how she has the Kirby face on her and the dopey smile and the pink aesthetic? This is supposed to be the Legend of Zelda franchise. So his name is Zelig, kind of a mashup of Zelda's name and Link's name. But it's important to remember that they're not supposed to be the characters from the franchise exactly. They're supposed to be the video game franchise itself. So she's supposed to be Final Fantasy, and he's supposed to be the Dragon Quest franchise. And so their fighting moves or something will be loosely inspired by real world details about the style of the video game and its design. And it's such a ridiculous idea. This manga has serious problems. I can't really strongly recommend it because of how ridiculous it is. But if that premise sounds interesting to you, and if you're really interested in video games, I think you might enjoy this in spite of its many, many flaws. So what are some of its flaws? Well, maybe flaw number one is the stories by Anastasia Shestakova, and the art is by Crimson. And I think Crimson actually have a pretty neato style. They'll do like sort of standard, sort of standard, not that experimental anime style, but then they'll also do occasionally really cool experimental scenes where they draw in charcoal or graphite and they get really sketchy. But Crimson's problem is they reuse way too much art. This is one of the worst examples of copy-pasting images I've ever seen, to the point that if you try to turn it into a drinking game, you die. It's horrible and it breaks immersion. You're just going to see the same faces and the same poses and the same lazy backgrounds over and over and over again. And I think this started as a webcomic. It started as a popular webcomic, and then they kind of revamped it a bit for a book release. I think they should have definitely tried to do something to address all the copy-pasted art for the real world release. It's annoying because they do have some really strong moments where they're doing really neat stuff with expressive line work, but about 50% of the time you're just going to be like rolling your eyes, and I eventually just started skipping most of the story. That's how horrible this is. That even though I love it, it's so horrible that I eventually just start skipping huge chunks of the story because the art is so lazy. And then I just start looking for new characters and trying to figure out which video game franchise they're supposed to be. From a writing perspective, they also do a good job trying to help you understand what these video game franchises are. So, of course, the most popular video game franchises, Nintendo's Mario and Luigi, Sega's Sonic the Hedgehog, Tetris, those get more front and center staging. And then less popular video game franchises, they show up as sort of minor, incidental characters. And they also do neat little things at the end of the chapter where they talk about the history of video games, and they try to give you some clues to put two and two together on some of these. So you're constantly going to be challenged. You're going to be looking at this person saying, "Oh, well, what game's that supposed to be? I don't quite get it. What video game company is this country supposed to represent?" So it's almost like a fun challenge of trying to put it all together. So now that you know that I've said, this is one of the stupidest manga I've ever read, and I love it. Pretty much everything I could say about recommending this manga could be summarized in this little interaction. Don't lose my page. At the Ninteldo Castle. Thank you for the warm reception. Thank you for coming, Lord Tejirov. Ta-da! I have heard much of your skill, but we will not ask a great deal of you. Make yourself at home. All we wish of you is to stay here and protect the castle. Oh, is that all? Then I'm free to do whatever I like in my spare time? Well, it's not like Segua. It's going to make it this far anyway, are they? No, he'll come. If I'm right about him, he'll make it here. By him, you mean the one they call the Blue Sonic? So just in case you missed it, the evil emperor has a giant mustache and an M on his head, and he wears like a giant bright red suit of flaming armor, and his brother has a mustache and an L on his head, and he wears a giant set of cream. They're Mario and Luigi. So if you think you'd get a kick out of reading the all-powerful emperor saying all-powerful emperor stuff in the Mario and Luigi voice, you might get a kick out of this manga. If that doesn't sound like it's enough for you to have a chuckle at, there's nothing I can say to convince you to read this. Stay away from this stupid manga. But that's a great... I got a kick out of it. And definitely... Even when I got bored of some of the lazy art, even just like flipping through it and looking at some of the character designs and looking at some of the descriptions of the history of video games, that was interesting because they do talk about a lot of obscure franchises that were popular or famous in Japan that we never had over here. Now, unfortunately, I can't... You might have like a young person who likes video games. I can't recommend this for any young person. It's rated T, and the maturity rating system for manga makes no sense. I've seen books rated for older teens that I thought were the equivalent of a PG movie. This is a T-rated book, so you'd think, oh, well, that's going to be the equivalent of PG-13. I'd say this deserves like a rated M for mature rating, like for video games, or a rated R rating. It's got a lot of crass humor in it, and they're like whole characters like Tejirov, where the whole thing about their character is that their mind is in the gutter. And it's one of the things I hate about it, is that it's so much that it takes you out of the story. I think when you read manga, you kind of have to get used to the fact that maybe just as a culture, Japanese manga seems to really like, skeevy humor or sexual humor, and have sexual moments even in children's entertainment. And I think that a lot of people like Akira Toriyama will use it sparingly. So think about Master Roshi. Master Roshi is one of Goku's instructors, and he's supposed to be a pervert and, kind of do inappropriate things, like harass some of the beautiful females who go on the adventures. But Master Roshi always gets punished for that. So he'll kind of like make a crass comment, or he'll devise some sneaky plan, and then he'll be discovered, and then, Bulma or Launch will smack Master Roshi across the face. And that'll be funny, because even if it's kind of a sexual gag, it's a sexual gag that's teaching you an important lesson. A young person will look at that and laugh and say, ha ha, Master Roshi is doing something wrong, and he got smacked across the face. So the humor comes from the fact that, Master Roshi never escapes justice for his inappropriate behavior. The tone of the sexual humor in this is different. It's just sort of slapped in there. It's pretty continual, and there's no comeuppance for it. So it's not, ha ha, pervert, you shouldn't be a pervert. It's, ha ha, perverted sexual humor, ha ha ha. And the fan service too. I think it takes you out of the story. So every single girl has to be a giant, busty babe, and it actually undermines what could be serious or very emotionally effective moments. They'll have like a very, sincere, sweet moment where they're trying to define their character, but then they're also having like a sort of sexual subtext. I really don't appreciate that. I think it's a amount thing. Like if you cross a certain percentage, it starts getting ridiculous, and this definitely crosses that percentage of having so much fan servicey humor that it's hard to accept it. Now, of course, it's a video game Gaijinka, so it's already a ridiculous premise to start with. But I think when you're starting with such a ridiculous premise, you have to do some extra work not to break your reader out of the story more than they already are. The fights are okay. They do some actual work trying to make the fight seem interesting and strategic. I think the problem is one of concept. Since every character is based on a video game, it's already a little ridiculous, and the powers are kind of arbitrarily defined by things that are true of the video game the character are inspired by. So this guy, Tejirov, is supposed to be Tetris, and Tetris is from Russia, so they kind of Russianized the name Tetris. That's another problem, is a lot of this involves like Japanese wordplay, so I'm missing half of this. Like, I think I barely figured out that Tofai is supposed to be Street Fighter, because it'd be Street Fighter, Tofai. So you're going to have a really hard time picking up some of what these franchises are supposed to be, but I think that's part of the fun, is piecing it together. Now, in addition to what I said about the sexual humor just being way too much for me, like it breaks me out of the story and makes me annoyed. They have this really amazing moment about why capitalism rocks, and this hurts me because if it had just this scene and it didn't have all the sexual humor in it, like this would be a really great introduction to young people of why capitalism rocks and socialism sucks. Which makes sense because he's from Russia, right? And so they're bringing some of the real-world politics of Russia into his character. It seems they're going from socialism to capitalism. And then they just have like a really cutely illustrated explanation of how socialism works and how capitalism works and the consequences that has for society. So see, there's all the socialists working, and then there's the guy taking it easy because he gets all he needs out of the socialist system from the government. Whoa! Yes! That's fantastic. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that the stupidest manga I've ever read, something that's so stupid I can barely... I feel ashamed that I've read this much of this. But even it is smart enough to get that socialism sucks, which puts it leaps and bounds ahead of so many Western comics that are praising socialism. All right, Western comic artists, the stupidest manga I can find understands a little bit more about the real world than your stupid pro-socialist, pro-social justice comic. So if you want like a great example of like just some praising of capitalism, yes, you're right. Capitalism's wonderful. Issue 5 is pretty neat. Now, to illustrate what I'm talking about, this literally comes right after a whole sequence where he's remembers being a child being raised by a sexy nun for no reason whatsoever other than they wanted to have a sexy nun in it, and it doesn't make any sense, and it takes you out of the world of the story. This is just... You got to prepare yourself for a really ridiculous, really stupid reading experience where if you're not interested in video games, there's no point. There's no point. So, there was an anime adaptation of this, and I haven't checked it out yet. I kind of like the manga format because then I get to read the author's notes and pick up some of the interesting video game history. So my conclusion is kind of what I've said. Really stupid. So stupid it's annoying, but commits to a bit in a way that's genuinely funny and genuinely clever and historically interesting. I'd probably want to go read like a regular history of video games now to learn about some of these franchises, because this kind of whet my appetite a bit for the real world history that is loosely inspiring this ridiculous world. World War Blue by... That's interesting, too, that it's a Russian author. Anastasia Shestakova. There's a story behind this. And art by Crimson. So consider this my heavily qualified, numerous asterisk recommendation of this series. No kids. Okay, this is one of the worst fan service comics I've ever read. So no kids, and don't read it if that creates problems for you. But fine. Could definitely, that was the whole point. This is an inspiring example of committing to a bit and making something that shouldn't work kind of work in spite of its flaws. I'm #1 Marmaduke fan. I love you guys, and I love my patrons on Patreon. I'll catch you later.